we were delivering a project for L'Oreal Professional Products in the UK and Ireland. So I got the fabulous opportunity to meet thousands of people all around, traipsing around the UK and Ireland. So it was heaps of fun and lots of big breakthroughs. So it was great.
And a bunch of free product. I once did something with Johnny Walker, and I got a lot of free product for that one as well too. Not necessarily good for my health, but it was fun at the time.
I was going to say, how did your liver enjoy that?
We're entering a phase in technology where automation tools, particularly AI, are replacing a bunch of different human functions. Now, this can create a personal, emotional, mental dilemma that we are sacrificing human connection for technology shortcuts and faster ways to do things. Now, of course, we cannot slow the speed of change. Automation is great if you know how to use it, which is why today we're going to be talking about how to balance automation tools and human connection, particularly in the sales cycle. And to help me out, I have with me here right now, Chandelle Labbozetta. She is the CEO and founder of the Life Puzzle. She's a master trainer of NLP, and she's actually a former finalist for Miss World Australia too. Chandelle, how are you, mate?
Oh, I'm so well. It's been a little while since someone's brought that up, but it's great to be here, James. Thanks. How are you?
I'm great. Now, I also know that that you were once a tap dancer, or at least studied tap.
Yes.
What does tap dancing and NLP and sales training have in common? Anything?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. It does. And I've never been asked that before, but tap dancing and NLP and sales has a common factor around rhythm. And I think that when we're building relationships, when we're looking at human behavior, when we're looking at the way in which people interact with each other, there is a song, there is a rhythm, there is a tempo, and it's knowing what's the right sound and what are the right beats and where do they fit in order to make it sound and look and feel amazing. So I definitely love that question, and there absolutely is a connection.
Well, I've been following you for some years now, and on the topic of rhythm, I actually, at least once a year, I see that you'll be hosting a sales event in Melbourne, and I've known, and this has happened several years in a row now, and every year I've like gone, oh, I should get to that event. I haven't yet. I've got it even better. I've got Chandelle on my podcast. But that there is clearly a rhythm. It's clearly something that you're doing every year. And then another fun observation, I had a look to when you entered our funnel, when you started like entering our world, and you might not know this, but you entered our world when you downloaded a free resource of ours called Content Rhythms. Did you know that?
Know that is absolutely fantastic, and clearly you can see I'm passionate about the topic of rhythms.
Yeah, the topic of rhythms. Now, obviously, I just mentioned that I've been invited to a couple of your events in Melbourne, and next one I will go to. But I also know that earlier on this year, I saw in your posts you popping up all over the world, or was it largely Europe? What were you doing there?
Yeah, fabulous. So early in March, I had the opportunity of doing a roadshow in the UK and Ireland, and we were delivering a project for L'Oreal Professional Products in the UK and Ireland. So I got the fabulous opportunity to meet thousands of people all around, traipsing around the UK and Ireland. So it was heaps of fun and lots of big breakthroughs. So it was great.
And a bunch of free product. I once did something with Johnny Walker, and I got a lot of free product for that one as well too. Not necessarily good for my health, but it was fun at the time.
I was going to say, how did your liver enjoy that?
I acquired a taste for whiskey that I haven't unfortunately been able to shake. Now, your business is called Life Puzzle. Mm-hmm. And as far as my understanding is because you see sales and life as being intricately interconnected. But tell me, how did this business begin, Life Puzzle? Where did it come from?
Yeah, so I think you know that a lot of people have a challenge in terms of being able to, achieve the things that they want and get what they want. And one of the things we say is that sales is the number one life skill. And often people will ask us, at Life Puzzle, you do communication training, NLP training, you do sales training, you do leadership training. How does that relate to sales? And we say that everybody is in sales because there are three important sales. The first sale is the sale you make to yourself about your worth and your value. And I often refer to this thing that we call the itty bitty shitty committee. They're the group of people that sit on your shoulder and tell you why you can't have what you want. So we help people fire the itty bitty shitty committee so that they can convince themselves that they are confident, they are capable, and that they are worth achieving the things that are important to them. So the first sale you make is the one to yourself. The second sale is the sale of influence and being able to build authority and messaging and lead with influence. And sometimes we do that with teams in organizations where we might need to enroll a team member to get motivated about a project. Or I often joke and say, if you're a parent, that bedtime is a sales conversation, or homework being completed is a sales conversation. So largely we are in an environment where we have to share our ideas and be compelling and convincing and influential. And that is a sales process. There's just no transaction of a product or a service. And then, of course, the third one is the one that we're all familiar with, which is the transactional sale. How can I build value in the product or the service that I have, that it delivers and is very clear the return on investment that someone's going to get? So it's just a no-brainer for them to say yes. And actually, one of the key things, as you know, James, I published a book called Confident Closing a number of years ago. And originally I wanted to call it Feeding Salt to Horses, because you probably know that none of us are really a fan of the idea of pushy, sleazy, gross sales tactics. And to me, it's about creating that depth of that human connection and that relationship, and how do we meet needs with outcomes and products and services. And so originally, when I went to publish the book, I wanted to call it Feeding Salt to Horses, because many people have heard the adage that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. However, if you feed the horse salt, by the time you show it the water, it will just be a no-brainer and make sense to drink because they're thirsty. So I'm a really big fan of helping people to connect the relationships that they have with needs and outcomes, and being able to create a depth of trust and a journey together.
I want to unpack this because there's three parts to this. But firstly, I got to ask, do horses like salt?
I don't know. I didn't actually check with them. It's quite funny. When I was researching niching and going fishing and making those comparisons, I did talk to fishermen about that. However, I haven't actually spoken to any of my horse friends or people who are involved in horses. I believe they do. So
because I'd really like to explore that. And the reason why is that you talked about three types of sales, and we'll unpack that.
Yes.
But it's a lot easier to sell a want than it is to sell a need. And most sales usually happen in stages, which means that sometimes we might offer them a smaller package. And you use the expression no-brainer. We love helping our clients assemble an offer that we call a high no-brainer. It's like a standalone thing. Someone's going to buy it right then and there. And then we introduce the continuity or the recurring revenue or the whatever it is, the marriage piece. Yes. So we're not inviting a stranger to marry us. We might sell them the high no-brainer first. But the high no-brainer is usually something that they want, rather, that they probably need it as well too, but they have this want.
Yes.
And then the continuity might be something that they need. And I'm looking at this particular metaphor and I'm thinking, you know what? You give the horse something that they want, which is the salt, but then it sets you up to introduce the thing that they need, which is the water, and they go nuts because they've had it. But anyway, let's unpack these three bits.
Yes.
Yourself.
Yes.
So you've got to sell yourself. So this is about things like combating imposter syndrome and like that.
Yeah. So a lot of people don't really know, I'm happy to share, but a little bit about my background and my story. So before I was a master trainer of NLP, I was in corporate sales. I had ambitions to climb the corporate ladder, did really well, was on, high six-figure salaries in my early 20s, etc. But I had that imposter syndrome. So we used to call it swan management. I was gliding across the top of the water. Everybody thought I was outwardly confident and capable. I was achieving great results, but internally, nothing was ever good enough. If the mark of a good job was here, above average was here, my expectation of myself was up here, I'd fall short of ridiculous and beat myself up for the 3% that was missed, as opposed to of the ridiculous expectations as well. And so I think that there's a lot of people that have versions of lack of confidence or lack of worth in many different ways. Sometimes it's about comparison to other people who they think might be doing better. Sometimes it's an imposition on self. I should be doing more when they're actually doing great and they don't recognize that they are. And sometimes it's just that they don't know what they don't know. So some of their aspirations or the things that they'd like to have, they don't believe are in reach for them. So I think it's a really big part to actually have a belief, because what we focus on, we create, and energy goes where attention, or energy flows where attention goes, rather. So
there's a great book by Dan Sullivan.
Yes.
One I read recently called Times 10 is Easier Than Times 2. But
Yes.
he talks about a concept, and I think he's got a whole book on it, but he talks about a concept called the gain and the gap.
Yes.
And what a lot of what we do a lot of the time is that we set these goals for ourselves, and then we may or may not achieve those goals. Most of the time we don't. We get 50% there, or 70% there, or even 20% there, right? But that's the way it works. We set the goals. And some people measure themselves against the goal. Now, the problem with that is that the goal is a complete fiction. You made it up. Yes. Right? And you're beating yourself up for setting an imaginary fictional goal, not achieving it, and you beat yourself up. But however, there's also the progress that you make. And some people are fixated on not achieving the goal. Other people fixate on the progress that they made, the 10%, the 20%, the 50%, to the 70% to satisfying that goal. And then they can, at the end of every day or every week or every month, they can go look at the progress I made rather than look at me falling short. How do you help your people deal with these confidence issues if they want to start selling themselves with confidence?
Yeah, I think from that perspective, it's really about being clear on what that gap actually looks like. One of the principles we look at is, where is the present state? So what do I have now? And where do I want to get to as in terms of the desired state? And a really big portion around why people either miss the goal or perhaps get demotivated and don't even make the 20% is that they fail to set up the milestones of progression. And so what we do is we look at what is the BHAG, or the big, hairy, audacious goal. And then we look at where's the present state and assess what are the milestones along the way. And so we really focus on helping people zoom in and zoom out. So what do I need to do in the next 15 minutes versus is what I'm doing in the next week going to contribute to what's happening at the end of this month, or what's at the end of next week, or what's at the end of the 6 months or the quarter. Ideally, what we want to do is celebrate the milestones, because then you're always celebrating progression and success while still keeping in mind the big goal that you're going after. So that's a really big part too.
I even love the bit of breaking it down into 15-minute increments. I mean, a lot of us procrastinate. We all do it at some point. No one is not a procrastinator at some point.
Absolutely.
But the things that we don't do, sometimes if we set a 15-minute goal, we get started and then we create this little bit of momentum. And then before we know it, it's 45 minutes in and we've finished the job.
You and I are on the same pathway there. I remember hearing years ago, I'm not sure whether I read it somewhere or someone told me about it, but basically it was like, if you're procrastinating about something, sit down, put on a 15-minute timer. And if at the end of that 15-minute timer, you're still not enjoying the task, then you can move on. Yet majority of the time, it's the getting started that a lot of people get stuck with. And once they're into it, the timer goes off and they're like, yeah, I'm doing this. It's great. I'm finished it.
I think I learned this one. I learned that one from my mum, who is a teacher, my mother. Yeah. And she was a teacher and she hated doing her marking, because you got to do your marketing, you got to do the reports. And she'd sit down and she'd go, you know what? I'll just do 3 or I'll just do 5. And then before you know that, she'd worked through the entire class. Now, how young or old is your business? It's about
we've been around for just under 20 years now. So we've been around.
It's so incredible. I mean, same with me in my world and my various business ventures, but it seems like such a long time. Speaking of mothers, you started this business with your mum, yeah?
Yeah, 100%. So my lovely mum, Teresa, who's the co-founder of Life Puzzle, and shared the passion with me around the idea that, often people's limitations could be the blockers for them being able to achieve everything that they want. And that whether that's, through relationships or whether that's through being able to achieve a certain goal or an outcome. Teresa was very, very passionate around and had a beautiful way of being able to help people realize the brilliance that might have been laying dormant within themselves. And unfortunately, my mum lost her battle to pancreatic cancer 5 years ago, but her legacy and all the things that we stood for in the context of intergenerational mental health and making sure that people can achieve what they want for themselves and for their families is definitely still alive. And we actually just recently, a couple of days ago, one of her students from 16 years ago who was unaware that she'd passed sent a message and, obviously with condolences, but she was talking about how the impact of Teresa's belief in her and giving her the tools to believe in herself was still with her some 16 years later. So I really believe that when someone has a sense of volition within themselves, and I personally hold a belief that, regardless of what comes up, I'll always find a way. And whether that's through the power of communication from people who know more than I do, or perhaps maybe through, finding support or figuring it out for myself. I think that that's a really foundational belief around having internal confidence. And so very privileged to be able to continue my mum's legacy.
You're very, very lucky there to have a supportive role model in your life. Particularly, you mentioned the intergenerational thing.
Yes.
A lot of the time what we're trying to do is we're trying to break intergenerational bad attitudes or bad habits or
Yes.
bad mindset. Was there something, is there's some way of looking at the world that she was able to help you with when you were young? Because you've done a lot of interesting different things. How did that become? Where did that come from? Was that something that she said, or was it an expectation, or were you born that way?
Yeah, no, definitely wasn't born that way. And certainly my mum had a huge role to play in terms of helping me to find those solutions. So as I mentioned earlier, as a master trainer of neurolinguistic programming, we see lots of things around the impacts of behavior and the beliefs that people have around themselves. And previously, my transition into this area of work was actually fueled by the fact that I myself had some pretty severe and serious mental health issues, right to the point where I had a bit of a plan where I wanted to exit this place. And it was my fear of failing, believe it or not, that actually stopped me from taking action on that. And at the time, my mum was exploring things that she could do after she finished in her hairdressing career. She'd owned many salons around Melbourne, and it was some time for her to sort of move on to something else. And she said, I think I'm going to make people beautiful on the insides of their heads instead of the outsides of their heads now. And she went off to go and do a hypnosis training as an exploration of what she might do and what qualifications she might gain. And I was in such a precarious state at that particular point of time. She was actually afraid to leave me at home for the weekend. So she said, come with me, we'll go and we'll have a girls' weekend and it might be interesting. And when I was there, the people who ran the training also ran training in NLP. And I was interested because when I'd worked at KPMG years earlier, I had a mentor who had told me about it. And so when my mum saw that I had a tiny little bit of interest in this program, she signed us up for every course they had. And, I'm confident to tell you that after such severe mental health challenges, some 20 plus years ago, I have been able to remain healthy and have not had any relapses. And truth be told, it was a very big thing in my life to lose my mum. And if anything was going to tip me back into mental health challenges, then that probably would have been it. I guess the thing that I want to highlight here is just the passion for intergenerational mental health, because a lot of the time, it's a very topical subject around mental well-being, mental health, labels that are associated with mental health, and they don't just affect the person that they're the person who's going through them. It affects the family, it affects the people in the community, the people you interact with. And so for me, I think when we know how to manage that relationship with ourselves, it makes us show up better for everybody else too.
What I find really interesting about this is that a lot of people out there would have seen you crushing it at KPMG and they just wouldn't get it at all. But one thing that I know now that I've been running businesses for 20 years, just like you, and I hang around with a lot of business owners, all the time is the complexities of mental health. I think it was Jack Delosa that said, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, one of the first things that you should probably do is go see a psychologist or something like that. Yes. And so many of my entrepreneurial friends see someone, and that is because we live these incredibly dynamic and exciting journeys where there are these high highs and these low lows.
Yes.
Indeed, Chandelle, I've been talking about this with a friend of mine, Sam Higgins. You're the first to hear this now. I was starting a podcast called You'd Have to Be Crazy.
Yes.
And the idea is just interviewing entrepreneurs about mental health, because I don't know, it's not something that entrepreneurs necessarily talk about, because all the time we're on show, we're on the podium, we're talking about how great things are, we're selling a vision to our staff, our customers and clients.
Yeah.
Yet it's really, really hard mental work.
Yes. It's like Joseph Campbell's hero's journey over and over and over again as an entrepreneur. I often joke and say you have to be a special kind of person to be an entrepreneur and stick at it. There's lots of people who give it a go.
Lots of people give it a go. Not many people stick.
Yeah.
This actually segues not too badly into that second element. So we want to sell ourselves, and there's clearly a lot to unpack with that, which we can't possibly do now, but it's to do with imposter syndrome, self-esteem, setting realistic goals and milestones, acknowledging our progress rather than what we haven't achieved. And then Chandelle mentioned the hero's journey. The next piece that you mentioned was the influence piece, or the authority piece.
Yes.
How do you help your people start to build, I don't know, the story, the myth, the legend around them so that they can become the logical choice?
Yeah, look, there's so many things that I could tell you about how we help with that. And we run a lot of multi-tiered leadership programs with people who are in senior leadership on the front line, those sorts of things. But the one thing that I'll say that I think the listeners could take right now is that I think part of the influence journey is actually around shifting the focal point, if you like. So getting interested rather than being interesting. A lot of the time when people are trying to influence, they're like, what can I tell you about myself? What can I show you that is about me that's going to make you go, wow, I want to follow? And in actual fact, one of the key factors around being influential is to make it about the person that you want to influence. And that is often about creating curiosity. It's about or being curious about what's important to them, about how you can take them along the journey. And that's true in management. It's true with your children. It's true with your spouse or your significant other. It's very much true in the context of being able to feel like you're building a dialogue rather than a monologue. And, you know, just one piece that might slightly be off topic for us here, but I think you'll find it interesting, is that we have at the moment, you know, a unique position where we've got 4 generations of workers in the cultures of organizations. And what we see often is that there's a really big divide between, say, what the Generation X and the Generation Z and the Ys or the millennials see as being the right way to approach work versus what perhaps maybe the X's and the baby boomers that are still in our workforces think is a good day's work. And so this is really an interesting piece around dialogues versus monologues, because so many of our emerging leaders in our organizations and people who fall into that millennial category and below have had a relationship with devices and one-way communications. And so entering into the workplace, sometimes they're struggling with the human element of our relationship building because they're unpracticed in having dialogues that are out loud and verbal, and have been used to having one-way conversations that, you know, have with them the benefits of, I can cancel out of that if I don't want to, or if I don't want to talk to you right now, I just won't pick up my phone or respond to your DM, etc. So it's very interesting to see the dynamics happen with that. And I think, you know, leadership and influence as the second sale is very much about getting interested in, how can this be collaborative? How do your needs match with mine, and where can we find a middle ground?
Because when you said the getting interested piece, my mind went off in one direction.
Yeah.
And that was, you know, people come to us and they say, oh, what's the type of content that I should put on social media? And you're right, most of the content on social media by businesses is them trying to be interesting, which for them is, we're the best at this, we're awesome at that, you should hire us. It's real push marketing message and stuff.
Yes.
But getting interested, I've made this suggestion to people so many times. They say, what should I do? I would say, come up with the top 20 questions that your customers or clients ask you all the time, and then shoot a 60-second video answering that question. And before you know it, you're actually creating content that they want to hear because you got interested. What are they interested in? And then you've created the content around that.
Yes.
But then you took that in a really interesting direction here. And this is probably a good way for us to get into the automation piece.
Yes.
But the first sale is yourself. The second sale is the influence and authority. The third sale is the transactional sale. We don't necessarily need to go into a lot of depth here on that today. And indeed, you know what, Chandelle? I'm pretty sure that you've probably got some sort of like resource or download or some free training that I can link underneath this video to help people
Absolutely
get into that stuff with you. Yeah, cool. But the bit that Chandelle talked about there was this, younger humans not necessarily knowing how to carry a conversation, older humans finding it a real struggle to have these back and forth conversations via a Slack app, an app like Slack. Really complicated stuff. But what about this question about how to balance automation tools and human connection?
Yeah.
Because you've got younger people that are used to this one-way staggered back and forth. I had a guy work with me, Sam, and he was very shy, but he was absolutely great at dating. And I went, why is he so good at dating? Is because I can do it through the apps. I can think about an answer.
Yes.
And all the other stuff. I don't know how his first dates went. He got lots of dates. I don't know how they went. But that's a completely different generational thing. There's a generation that's used to that. Yes. And then there's another generation, particularly in sales. Yes. You love this, Chandelle. In sales, they always say, my industry is all about relationships. It's not about relationships. It's about trust.
Yes.
And for most of human history, the best way to build trust was through a personal relationship.
Yes.
Now we're at this crazy place where we can use automation tools as a way to build trust, but are we sacrificing human connection? So let's talk about this. What got you excited about this topic, balancing automation tools and human connection?
Yeah, well, what makes me think about this is that, extremes in anything is dangerous, right? So I want to make it really clear that as I talked about the different generations and what people are comfortable with, it's not so much about pointing the finger at either one and say that's wrong. It's about, I actually believe that it's about understanding, getting interested, and it's about creating that middle ground. And how this relates and why I was interested in the ability to talk on these subjects, to research on these subjects, and to look at human connection and automation is that I think that there's a definite distinction around going too far one end or the other, and there is a connection to generations on that. Now, the interesting thing, and I'm sure you're familiar with and have spoken about before, the ZMOT study in terms of the 7-11 4, and the touch points and things like that. And for anyone,
I'll pause you there so other people know what you're talking about. ZMOT if you're Australian, ZMOT if you're American. Google put out a report called the Zero Moment of Truth, and they analyzed billions of transactions across hundreds of thousands, hundreds of millions of websites. I don't know. They've got that much data. And they came up with all these interesting statistics, like, and I'm probably going to get it wrong, Chandelle. You've probably looked at it more recently than I do. But I remember it was something like there needed to be like 14 touches across 3 different platforms and 7 hours of engagement or something like that.
That's correct. So the idea was that people would rack up 7 hours of interaction with your brand or your offering or the information that you're willing to share, the 13 touch points. So as in like, how many times did you touch with information over those 7 hours? And then also over 4 different platforms. And I think that one of the things that we're seeing, particularly in the area of our sales trainings with organization, I'll just give one example, is that we're seeing people who are, perhaps at the other end of the generational scale, where traditionally sales was about cold calling or outreach, or it was about going to a visit and having a coffee with someone and talking about their needs and the brief. Whereas we're seeing a resistance from some people in the earlier generations in terms of picking up the phone because they'd much prefer to send a LinkedIn message, or they'd much prefer to send a text. And, you know, it's about, well, where do we find, knowing with the ZMOT study that it's 7 hours and, you know, sorry, I think I said 11 touch points, right? The 11 touch points, you know, one of those might be a telephone conversation. One of those might be something that's in your automation workflow. One of them might be a tool that goes out to some of your clients, which is like an article that's interesting for them to read, that's not necessarily written by you, but something that will help promote, you know, the thinking around the solutions, etc. And I think what you talked about before in terms of, we know that sales is really about building trust, or doing sales and being successful is about building a depth of trust. And you know, I always like that saying that resistance is shallow and acceptance is deep. And it takes time to be able to make those touch points over time and build the depth of trust. I think you mentioned it before, the coffee to marriage principle. You know, I can't have a coffee with somebody today and then propose marriage on the first date. We have to build a relationship over time. And that's where I think that lovely bridge between the human connection and the automation tools just help to make a really well-rounded, middle-grounded customer journey where people can feel like they're seen, heard, and understood.
So just for fun, and I didn't necessarily see the conversation going in this direction, but it would be fun to like try and unpack what those 7 hours and 11 touches and 4 platforms might look like in a modern B2B sale. And they do say, I mean, like, these are averages, 7 hours, 11 touches, 4 platforms. I mean, like, depending on the industry, it could be 3 hours, 4 touches. But you know what? It could also be 40 touches, yes, depending on to what it is that you do. But you mentioned some ideas or concepts there. Let's break down, say, 11 touches. What could be like 11 different ways that we can engage with our audiences?
Yes.
Balancing this idea of automation and connection. What might be some examples of these 11 touches? What are some things we could do?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking straight away as you're saying that out loud that, you know, you mentioned that I downloaded your content rhythms tool, right, many years ago. And, you know, I've been following you for a long time too. So we've been mutually respecting each other for many years. But let's say I download that, you know, what's the next step in terms of, you obviously know that I'm interested in something that I would call that a suspect. This person is a suspect. What's my way to turn them into a prospect now? So, you know, what's my next point of contact? Is it a text message that says, hey, I saw that you downloaded that tool. Once you've had a look at it, did you want to, you know, access this tool, which will help you to put that into implementation? So you might send something else, or, you know, it might that might have been a different platform that you've sent it on. Or, you know, there might be a workflow that you automate that's like 4 or 5 days after that going, hey, I share lots of free stuff on LinkedIn that's with relation to, you know, the topic that you downloaded that tool. I noticed we're not connected yet. Why don't you jump on and connect with me? So that's another touch point, right? I really like the idea of having a human connection point as well. So inviting people to, you know, jump on the phone. So we have, you know, people that might reach out on the phone and say, look, you know, really appreciated that you've registered for our web event coming up. You know, the presenters like to understand what motivated you to register for that event so that we can make sure that you're going to get your objectives met in the session. Tell me a little bit about what are some of your challenges, or what was it that made you register? So there's a phone conversation with someone. Following that phone conversation, there might be an article that you send out that's written by someone else. It's, hey, it was great to connect on the phone today based on what you said. Here's an article, really short, 5 minutes to read, that's around the subject that we talked about in terms of your time with your sales process or getting your team motivated. I thought you might be interested in it. And then they come to the webinar, right? And so then you might have a post-event survey that they fill in and a gift that they download with some free training. There are so many different things that we could do here. You could keep me busy.
I'm mapping something right here. You talked about milestones before. So just say like the first step is a gift. Someone opts in for a gift. Imagine for a second that you could redirect that person after they opted in for a gift to a video, right? And so what I'm doing is I'm mapping Chandelle's touches here with the 7 hours concept. So imagine I opt in for a gift and I'm redirected to a video. An SMS gets sent immediately. Now that there is a different context, it's a different platform. We've gone from email and video. I mean, like, you could opt in for the gift on Facebook.
Yes.
You get redirected to the website where you watch the video. You get the SMS. That's a different platform again. And the SMS could confirm the thing and also have a link to that video or another video.
Correct.
Then a day later, hey, let's catch up on LinkedIn. You invite that person over to LinkedIn. If you've got your content rhythms happening on LinkedIn, they'll see you coming up every now and then.
Exactly.
But then a day later, you might send another email to an article, as Chandelle said, or a video, or check out this podcast I just did with James Tuckerman.
Yes,
check out this podcast
exactly.
I just did with Chandelle. Then they get to listen to you. They get to hear you. They get to feel like they know you. Follow up the next day with a tactic. Follow up, a week later with a case study. In our world, what we do is we have the first email that we send, we call the promise, and we deliver on the promise that we made. So if they opt in for that gift, we deliver on the promise. And guess what? We do also send an SMS at the time, which links to something else.
I know, that's why I said it.
Then 24 hours later, we send the welcome email, and the welcome email, we tell our story. There's no call to action, and it's usually something a bit vulnerable. I highly encourage this. It's very rare to be able to just talk about yourself, but it will make you be more memorable. People are less likely to opt out because they'll remember who you are and what you're about. I think the number one reason why people opt out of lists and what have you is that they've just forgotten opting in. They don't have an emotional attachment to the person. Then the third email, so this is more about the timing here. The first email comes instantly, which is the promise. The second email comes 24 hours later, which is the welcome, tells you a story. The next email comes 48 hours later, and we call that the offer. And we invite them to book a call, and we talk about what we do and how we help. And that's about demonstrating that we're commercial. We're just not in that. We're not doing this just to be friends here. We're doing it because this is the business that we run. Now, the next bit is the important bit because it goes instant, 24 hours later, 48 hours later. Then we send another email 3 days later, then another email 4 days later, another email 5 days later, an email 6 days later, and then an email 7 days later. And then you can send an email every week. And as long as it's value, they'll stick around forever, as long as you keep delivering value. And those are just touches. We haven't even got to the platforms or the hours. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. And I think, you prompted my mind, obviously, around the emotional connection. People will buy emotionally first and then justify their purchase and logically after that. So we often say that 90% of our lives is lived subconsciously, only 10% consciously, which means that 90% of that emotional connection comes from people being able to build that depth of trust. And I think with those touch points and the different platforms, adding that human connection and that emotional piece is such an important part of that flow. I'm loving that funnel. And I think that there's also, for the listeners, I think it's also important to remember that sometimes people who are suspects that are raising their hand to see what you're doing right now aren't necessarily, they're just in their research phase. It's a motivation, but they're not necessarily ready to actually throw any decisions. And so building that relationship that you're keeping front of mind during that time helps to make sure that when they are ready to book a call and have a conversation or to get a proposal, that those touch points are going to be so much more well received. And it's quite funny, I'm sure you get this all the time too. I've met people sometimes at the events that I speak in, and they go, "Oh, I've been following you on LinkedIn for such a long time, and I love that piece that you wrote a couple of weeks ago where you talked about this and this and this. So, it reminded me of something you had posted a few years ago." And it's kind of like they feel like, or it sounds like, they've been really intimately involved in my life, and I might be meeting them in person for the first time, which is just so interesting to create that depth of trust.
It is. That's the influence and the authority piece, which is great that we're able to talk about automation, human connection. I can see the way that they balance in your world as well too, and in mine. The human connection piece is that we do podcasts like this. We have webinars. You also have live events in the real world, don't you? Yeah.
Yes, we do. Yes.
And I'm a little bit jealous. We stopped doing live events probably around COVID, and maybe we'll get back into it again. It is very difficult when I'm based in.
Come down, we'll share the stage with you.
We'll share the stage. But it is quite difficult when the majority of my clients are actually, well, I live in a small country town, and the majority of my clients are not even in the nearest major city. They're actually on the other side of the planet.
Yes.
That's the way that it works for me. So it's very, very difficult for me to do that. But then we also both do have people that call people, and we do strategy calls.
Yes.
And personal one-on-one time with people to get to know them.
Yes.
So we can balance these things. Now, we could not end this without talking about one thing, just given the time of and what's happening in the world right now and the evolution of technology. AI. How are you bringing AI into what you're doing, and how do you see AI having an influence over this constant balance between automation and human connection?
Oh, I think given the time we have, that's an unfair question. I don't have time to say everything I want to say on that. So very briefly, I believe that AI has a lot of benefits. I believe that the technology and all of the different automation tools that we have at our disposal can make such a difference in terms of touch points, time management, utilizing things. But I think it's important to remember that human connection is very important. And sometimes when we're using automation tools or we're using things like AI, whether it be ChatGPT or others, I believe it's really important to make sure not to create this reliance on that tool, because whether you realize it or not, lots of people can see through what's the difference between, you know, your human connection and the way that you write and speak compared to perhaps how ChatGPT is modeling you. I'm not saying they're not good. They're definitely good first drafts and maybe a great prompter. But I think one of the great things about those tools is that it makes it very easy for people who like me, might struggle sometimes with a blank page to write down what they want to say, to get the conversation started. And this comes back to curiosity, being interested, and really starting to utilize those things. So I think it's fantastic that we've got lots of people who have the ability to influence and make such an impact that it actually gives them tools to be great at things that maybe weren't their strengths in the past. And it's a great foundation to perhaps, you know, build the first draft of that copy for the first email or the first text message, or it might be a great way to be able to make sure that there's an automation that checks in with somebody after a few days that you've had the first point of contact. Whereas previously in the past, we had to rely on our memory or our admin assistants or ourselves to be able to do those sorts of things. So I think that's where it's really winning the mark. What I really do think is a danger, though, is that we might have gone too far to the other extreme sometimes when looking at these tools, because nothing beats the ability to influence somebody with, you know, a verbal conversation, whether that's a strategy scope call or whether it's a check-in, hey, how's it going? Hey, I just wanted to thank you for your business this year. Hearing someone's voice is another way of being able to build that depth of trust. And I think sometimes we might have situations where people need to build their confidence on having those conversations. So they sometimes use the tools as a way to procrastinate or to hide. So I just really want to balance those two things out and help people bridge the psychology and the strategy.
It's been a dilemma that people have asked us for years. They've like said, you know, I don't want to come across as inauthentic, or I don't want to come across as fake. And it is this delicate tightrope walk. And you don't want to be, well, here's the thing. If you're using automation and you're using AI, what it's going to do is it's going to help you do things in more efficient ways so you have more time.
Correct.
And when you have more time, you can spend more time with your existing clients, with your prospective clients, and you can deliver a more authentic experience when it really matters and counts. So if I'm meeting with you, you don't need a call from me 15 minutes before the meeting to tell me that we're going to have a meeting in 15 minutes,
That's
right? Exactly. Or even a call the day before. And people used to do that. They'd call the day before, just confirming that the meeting tomorrow is going ahead fine. And then they'd SMS people, just calling tomorrow to make sure that the meeting is going ahead. Now automation can do that for us. Yes. But it then also means that I could spend that hour before the meeting learning more about that person and arriving on the call fully informed and across and being the best and most authentic version of me. The challenge or the fear that I see, and this is, I'd like to get your thoughts on this, but I think that the biggest problem or mistake that we're already beginning to see people make is when they try to come across as authentic using an AI tool or a third-party tool, And unless they do it so exceptionally well, they come across as fake bullshit artists because it's so clearly just AI and it's not a real human. Have you experienced that yet?
Yes, I certainly have. And I think that this is something that we have in common in terms of like the dangers of really taking to the extremes. Earlier, I mentioned that I think middle ground is important because extremes in anything is dangerous. And I think that that's an example of one of those extremes where people have gone, oh, this is a great tool. I'm just going to get it to do everything. And, I'll just have it talk for me. Or, that I'll just, utilize this tool and pretend that I'm doing this instead. And that's why I think your discussion earlier around mapping the funnel and the journey and making sure that it's got a nice way of being able to connect and that it meets those touch points and it creates a depth of trust, balancing call to action with relationship building is really important. And I don't think that AI has figured out how to do all of that without our influence. The other thing that I think sometimes is really dangerous about the AIs is that you have to be able to ask some really good quality questions to get it to feed you the things that are really good quality answers. And so that's why I always say the quality of our questions determine the quality of our results. So I think that's definitely something too.
I think too, just if you're going to use it, guys and gals, just make it clear. So in the early days of email marketing, when email automation was new, I'd have to say to people, this is an automated email, right? Yeah. I'd actually say that in the email. I remember speaking at an event and coming down off stage and a woman said, you sent me an email in the middle of the event. How did you do that? Right? Yeah, this is the early days of email automation. People didn't realize you could, set schedules and all that other stuff. And I think that the next wave, if you are going to use AI, you need to acknowledge it. So, if you're doing a video that's your face and your voice and maybe your script, probably not your script, but it's your face and it's your voice and it's speaking, I think you should say at the beginning, hi, this video was created by AI.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I was only thinking about copy just then. I wasn't thinking about the automated video AIs. Yeah, that's a real challenge as well in terms of the authenticity of it. And I think sometimes you can really tell, and it damages a brand much more than it adds to it.
Yeah, well, we need to wind up, but I'm going to drop one thing that a mutual friend of ours is trialing at the moment.
Yes.
A mutual friend of ours at the moment is training up AI to do outbound calls.
Yes.
To invite their prospects to book meetings with them. I really like the idea, but if I was going to do it, I would make sure that the AI had my voice, a personality as close to me as possible. And the first thing that would say would be something along the lines of, hi, Chandelle, this is the AI version of James Tuckerman.
Yes.
It's not really him, but my human master has asked me to give you a call. Yeah, and Chandelle's laughing at this. If you're listening to this, she's cracking up. If you're watching it, you saw her do that. And that is how people on the phone will respond. They'll like, oh, hello, AI James. Why did your master ask you to give me a call? And then it's really fun and it's transparent. That's the way I want to see it. But anyway, we've got to wind up. So I want to say, Chandelle, now we've talked about selling to yourself so that you're confident. We're talking about the influence and authority bit, which is more about presenting you as the bigger package. There is the transactional sale, and by all means, download Chandelle's stuff, go to her events, get into that, because we both know it's a very deep well. It's a very, very deep well, the transactional sale. But it's not everyone that talks about the other pieces as well, because sales is the number one life skill, as Chandelle said. Any final words of advice before we wind this up?
Just get curious. Every opportunity that's out there can be advanced by getting curious and asking really great quality questions. So invite yourself to actually have a dialogue and ask people about them, about their motivations, about what's important to them and how they see the world. You might find that you have a really interesting dialogue. So I just want to say thank you so much for having me here. And it's been amazing having a conversation with you today.
So much fun. I'm glad we were able to make it happen after all those years. Yay!
Fabulous.